So everybody, last night we had some Patriots talk. It was 300, but we're on to 301. We're on to the 300s. And with me today is a very special guest from the Boston Herald. We have Patriots/Celtics columnist Andrew Callahan. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Happy Friday, Griff. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Look, could get started off by just, beating around the bush or saying anything else, but I know you've done some videos lately on some stuff with NBC and then your own podcast. Right away, we got to talk about it. Brandon Aiyuk, are you in favor, like you yourself, outside of being the columnist that you are, for the Patriots paying the price, or do you think the wait until free agency might be the better option to go?
So there are a couple components to this, right? Any trade involves a price, and we know the Niners are asking for a first-round pick. It's not going to be the straight up, here, have our 2025 first-round pick. And so the fake trade that I put together is a first-round pick swap. So before I get to that, I just want to say the other component, which is a little bit more boring when you're on TV or talking on podcasts or on your show, is the character and fit part, where if you're going to give up an asset like that for a player that you don't really know, and then you're going to give him a contract that could be upwards of 4 years for 120, 130, you need to know he's bought in. He acts like, plays like, practices like the way we want him to play, act, and practice, because he instantly, knowing what you gave up to get him and then the contract, has a lot of power in the locker room. Highest paid guy, everyone knows it, everyone's looking at him. So if he doesn't fit what Coach Mayo wants to do, then you're probably a little hesitant to pull the trigger. I don't know the answer to that about Brandon Aiyuk. I've never covered him, never been out to San Francisco for a Niners game, far outside of what I would say. But the deal I proposed, I would do if I was the Patriots, and the swap is essentially this. If you imagine where the Niners are currently projected to pick in the 2025 draft, long time away, we got a whole season to go, who the hell knows? But it's somewhere in the late 20s or early 30s, and the Patriots are going to be probably in the top 5, top 7. That gap is about worth an extra first-round pick. So if the Niners give up Brandon Aiyuk and a first-round pick, they get, in essence, because of the leap that they make, 2 first-round picks. Because if you think, hey, I'm the Niners, I want to go from 28 all the way to 5, the cost at a minimum is a first-round pick, because that's what the number 5 pick is worth in a trade. So you're giving up a first, the player who's worth a first, and Brandon Aiyuk, and getting 2 in return, and then you swap while the Patriots get the receiver they want, and of course stay in the first round.
Yeah, I agree with that, because at the end of the day, I know a lot of people value first-round picks. A lot of people look at that stuff like, oh, you can't give that up. You don't know what they're going to get. But at the same time, too, that's just it with these draft picks. They are lottery tickets at the end of the day. You don't know if you're going to scratch off and see 3 cherries. You don't know if you're going to go 2 for 3. So that's just the perfect balance of things with this. So if you can get, like, your trade, I really like that, the hypothetical. That really stuck out to me, where it's like, hey, you give up your trade, which, like, optimistically thinking, I'm hoping it's in the teens, but I don't know, like low teens. But realistically, yeah, if it's somewhere between 5 and even, let's say if it's like 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you give up that trade. But then for San Francisco, then they can even get that trade and then move back down, because next year there's always going to be a team that's probably hungry to get back up into that, especially if it's a top 5 pick, to get up in there. Meanwhile, with the Pats, like you said, you get the pick, you get the player, and guess what? You still have cap space to spend next offseason, which they've done a fantastic job this year. I feel like there's a lot of deals with this team where it's very team-friendly, but there's also a lot of, like, escape doors, you will, if they have to get out of some players, if it's just not working out, because at the end of the day, that's the nature of the beast in the NFL. You don't know if a deal's going to work out. You don't know if a player's going to work out. My only thing, if they were to wait till free agency, I just think you're worrying about losing out to certain teams, because New England no longer has that appeal of, hey, you're going to come here and you're going to be contending for championships. It's more now, hey, wait and see what happens, because we don't know if Drake May is going to have a CJ Stroud year. That's not saying that the Patriots are going to be first in division and win a playoff game. No, that'd be amazing, but I don't see that happening. But if you get the player now, you build that chemistry to where next year you can focus that money instead of going out and paying a wide receiver, because the wide receiver free agency class next year is going to be fairly loaded. I believe there's also, besides Aiyuk, you have him, you have Lamb, Higgins will be involved. You get the player now, and you can go and spend that money on an offensive lineman next year, So you're fixing 2 outlets at the same time, kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, and to the earlier point in your original question, which I didn't answer right away, about do you just wait till free agency and cross your fingers? The Patriots just went through that with Calvin Ridley, right? And it wasn't just that he ultimately spurned their offer, which reportedly came just shy of the Tennessee Titans, and his wife, not girlfriend, had no interest in coming up to New England. It's that they watched all of the receivers ahead of him who were projected to go into free agency, either get the franchise tag, sign an extension, or in certain instances get traded. And that's just how the receiver market is now. You think about great quarterbacks. Dallas is a great example of this, both on the receiver front with CeeDee Lamb and with the quarterback in Dak Prescott. it's almost unprecedented that either of these type of players at their positions and of their caliber are going to hit free agency, but they're in contract years. The thing is, both of those guys are not going to hit free agency because no one does. A quarterback or a receiver. Teams sign them or they trade them. And so when you're looking for one and you need one, like the Patriots have been for years, you don't get to wait till March, hand out the big contract to get them, because the best of those players now is Calvin Ridley, who's about to turn 30. You have to draft them or you have to trade for them. So in this case, you don't risk losing him out in a bidding war. You don't risk losing him to another trade. You make the trade yourself now. It is a little risky on both ends as far as this pick swap, but I think both teams bet on themselves. They do that here. And even if the Pats finish in the teens like you hope, and the Niners pick where they do in the late 20s, the gap there is still enough, or it's equivalent to modern trade charts would tell you, basically adding a first-round pick for the Niners, and that still makes it a fairly even deal.
That's why I mentioned them too in the whole potential to move back around, just because, you know, if you always get those teams that are in the teens that are in purgatory that, hey, we're desperate to move up for a quarterback. So for San Francisco, it's really a win-win, because at the end of the day, we know Aiyuk's probably not going to re-sign, because guess what? Niners have to re-sign Brock Purdy next year. I know, say what you want about Brock, but Brock's going to get a contract next offseason because he's going into his year. Dallas is such a weird one to me, because you have Dak Prescott. He could probably go out there and command 60. And I know that's crazy to say, but in this quarterback market, it's all about, oh, he's making this, I can make this. You have CeeDee Lamb, who's going to want 30 plus. And guess what? You got Micah Parsons as well, who they probably will tap the fifth-year option on him. But at the same time, too, there's the potential of not reporting, missing mini camp, and all this other stuff, because generational defensive linemen like him don't grow on trees. So Dallas really shot themselves in the foot on that one. And I'll be honest with you, CeeDee Lamb is my pipe dream. Love from wide receiver one. Broke my heart ever since that game against Dallas in 2021. But at the end of the day, I feel like New England, for as much as they want to be a draft and develop team, you got to swing for the fences on a player like Brandon Aiyuk, because they don't come available all the time.
The other part about that is timing to the quarterback. This is everyone's favorite analyst's favorite point, is you've got this cost-controlled rookie quarterback contract, which is the biggest discount in the NFL. It's at that time you surround them with high-priced offensive linemen, high-priced receivers, or a defense that you spend a little bit more on before you face the issue like the Niners are about to, that you just explained with Brock Purdy. You've got to then pay the quarterback, and he's absorbing somewhere between 20 to 25% of your cap, which means you cannot spend that much. It's essentially as if you're acting with 80% of the cap for the other 52 players in your team. And that's just not going to get you unless you really mine gold here through the draft, undrafted rookies or free agency. You find value. So that's where your hands are not tied. Teams can win. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is a good example, obviously, with the Chiefs, but they've drafted really well in concert with the time that Mahomes' contract has really been a burden on their cap. And so one more for the Cowboys too. Micah Parsons, that dude might command 25, 30 per year. It's a really extraordinary situation, and pass rushers are not quite in the quarterbacks and receivers never hit free agency tier, but they're close, because these are all premium positions.
It's like what Kansas City just went through with Chris Jones. I knew they had to keep him because guess what? Chris Jones is Micah Parsons. They don't grow on trees in the NFL. You have to get them, develop them, and make them into your own. Kansas City's a great point, too, because every year it's always been, oh, Patrick's got paid, but they've just found ways to hand the money out. Even Travis Kelce this offseason got a very interesting contract where it was not so much of a, hey, we want you to do this, but it was more of a, thank you for your service, everything you've done contract for the next couple of years. So they've really set themselves up there. But then you got a team like Buffalo where, look, they just went through it where they basically had to purge a bunch of people because it's realizing, hey, it's not working. I know they're a rival, but I commanded the hell out of them for it the more I think about it, where you let a lot of stuff go, like Stephon Diggs, who went to Houston, because Houston right now, same thing, great offseason too, because you went out, signed Danielle Hunter. You go out, you trade for Diggs, because guess what? In 2 to 3 years, you're not going to be able to afford those guys when your franchise quarterback's going to want that money. And like you said, takes up 20 to 25% of the cap. So for as much as you want to make those big player acquisitions, you have to do it when the time's right and when that window opens, because as we learned with a team like Buffalo, I'm not saying the window's shut, but it's not basically, it's just peeking. It's just just a little tip of it still open.
Yeah, and just to wrap the Buffalo point, because there's one more point I want to make about Aiyuk that I think people are missing. They needed to get younger and faster anyway. Like, I remember talking to people within the team ahead of that game in October. Patriots win, statement win for Mac Jones, and they go, look, we put a hurting on them at the 2022 season finale. We just turned the ball over late. And that was one of their higher scoring games in 2022, which granted is the gold medal of participation. Like any highlight from the Patriots 2022 season is just not really that important. But they did win that game. they did have an excellent offensive day. And it's because even as a slow offense, they exposed a slower, older Buffalo defense. And they have a linebacker whose name is escaping me now, but was a mid-round pick. They felt comfortable replacing him. Is probably their best defensive player right now. This is like peak offseason brain right now that I can't find his name. But wrapping up Buffalo, they'll continue, and I think have a better shot than people give them. We're just more unfamiliar with the names that are going to have to replace all the veterans they, as you mentioned, just cut ties with. Aiyuk also is not just the timing with Drake May's contract. It's not just the timing with all the cap and the cash the Patriots have. It's where he is in his career. This dude just turned 26. He's coming off of consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. He had 15 touchdowns in the last 2 years. And you could say, oh, this is a function of him being around Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey and a great offensive line. Partially that's true. He's also, among all of those players, the one that separates the best in isolation. Gets open, gets yards after the catch, and can play inside and out as far as the slot or outside the numbers. I want a player who, if I give a 4-year, $120, $130 million contract, to not only still be 29 when that deal ends, but be entering his physical prime and have already proven that he's worth that money with statistical production. Brandon Aiyuk checks every single one of those boxes, and it's a big cost, but that's what these players take if you're going to have to trade for them, which obviously the Patriots need to.
You did give me the title of this podcast, by the way, Gold Medal of Participation. I really like that. I was looking for little sound bites. Sure, yeah. I really like that one. Yeah, there's a lot of games from 2022 and even 20. I said this last night, but November 23. There's just I like the Men in Black memory wipe that. Yeah, all those 3 games from the season's catalog. But it's just it's the fact that everything you're saying is just it's the true stars are aligning. You have a rookie quarterback who, if he reaches his potential, could be Justin Herbert. You have a receiver, like you said, he's young. When this contract ends, he's entering the prime of his career. And guess what? You still have the cash left over to where if you give him that $120, $130 million contract, you know it's not going to hurt the team financially to where tough moves are going to have to get made. But another tough move that could get made soon is, look, we all know the Matthew Judon contract stalemate. We don't know where that's going. Part of me wants to keep him, like the fan of me wants to keep him, but the podcaster / the analyst that I am mainly on Twitter started to realize last night that maybe moving on from him isn't the worst option in the world, just because if he wants top of the line defensive the lineman money, coming off an injury, is it worth it? He is 32, which I hate saying that because I just turned 30 and hearing all these players, it's like, this guy's old. He's this. And it's like, they're the same age as me. I'm not old. But you know what I mean with that with Judon, where it's like, yeah, I understand keeping him, but at the same time too, if you can get something in return from him and ship him off to a contender, it may not be the worst thing in the world. But I want to make one other Aiyuk point. I still think that if a deal's not done by next weekend, I don't know if you make it and get him. I want it because I'd rather get Aiyuk in the building before training camp begins as opposed to once training camp's already started.
Yeah, and the last point on Aiyuk is obviously San Francisco's level of interest, and a lot has been made of this report that they have, quote, no intention of trading him, which is not like, hey, we're not going to do it. It's just we don't plan on it. Now, I wouldn't say that you could stumble backwards into a trade shipping off one of your players like, oops, I traded him. I didn't have any intention, but it happened accidentally anyway. But that is a factor here because it would be smart. And honestly, if I were them, I would try to deal Deebo Samuel before Brandon Aiyuk, given the age, productivity, and just where they are in their careers and the value you're going to get moving forward. As far as Judon, value going forward is really the discussion. I'm sure that there is a disparity in how he sees himself and how the team sees him. And obviously the injury part makes this a little bit murky, right? Because there's more for projection as opposed to going, hey, you had 11 or 12 and a half sacks, whatever it was in 2022. You went to, or excuse me, 2021. The year after in 2022, you had 15 and a half and go to yet another Pro Bowl. Well, the last we saw him was in Dallas, writhing in pain, grabbing at his bicep, and that was October 1st. So it's been a long time since then. You mentioned wrong side of 30, contract year, and they're undergoing a youth movement. He makes you better now. This franchise is not about now. This is about 2025, 2026, 2027. So why are you going to sacrifice, if you're the Patriots, significant cap and cash for a player who doesn't really help you achieve those ends? Now, I will say this is still an important year because this is a foundation-laying year for Gerard Mayo, Alex Van Pelt, Drake May, obviously, in the whole program. And Matt Judon is probably still your best player. So you want to keep like guys like that who I mentioned earlier about buy-in. Matt Judon's bought in. He has the vision. He has Mayo's respect, and it's mutual. So this, like most contracts, I'm sure is about length, years, and then guaranteed money. And they don't want to be committed too long to him. He would probably like to end his career. I know he said that publicly, and just kind of sit still because that's what we do here in our early 30s. Griff, we just chill. Some of us lose our hair. Others hang on to it. Whatever. Like it's It's what it is. So I think that's what it's going to come down to. But between him and Godchow, I would be surprised if one of them does not get a deal done, honestly, before the end of the first week of camp.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And also, too, like you said, I know as well, 30s, we just chill. Beard's getting a little bigger. Hair, like I know you like. Obviously, you're.
Oh yeah,
I
I'm committed to the Bic, baby. You shave it every other day.
The Bic. I have my spots starting to appear. It's just that's how life goes. But yeah, that's the other thing too. Just like the youth movement, also too, they want the players that are going to buy in. They want the players too that also. I don't want to say it's a big year for DeMarcus Covington, but DeMarcus Covington's got a lot to prove in the sense of just show the NFL world, hey, this defense is still top 10 for a reason. I do think Judon can't commit to that, but do I want to see Judon sign a 2 to 3 year deal? Sure. I don't want to see him like if he's trying to get 4 or 5 years, which takes him into when he's 36, when he's 37. That's where things start to get a little bit dicey because I don't want to see him leave the Patriots on bad terms, but at the same time too, he came here willingly from a Baltimore team that's great and took a leadership role with his team and has fully embraced it. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. It's just, I said this last night, and actually there's a couple people we're podcasting with, one of which also does cover the team like yourself. But I was saying last night that this season coming up reminds me a lot, I think, of what we saw in 2020 more than what we got in 22 and 23, where there's going to be some weird games where, hey, they beat a team you don't expect, like how the Patriots beat Baltimore on a Sunday night, or there's going to be games like the San Francisco one where they just put up an absolute stinker. That's just the vibe I'm getting because I don't see a way how this team is worse than last year, which also ties into their over/under 4.5 win total. Which I'm sorry, I'm leaning towards the over. You're asking them to win one more game than last year.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the general 2020 comp is fair. You'll have an offense that'll have a run-based identity. As soon as they fall behind, you're probably in trouble. That team was also a lot older, and the Patriots, are undergoing youth movement. Like the Packer way is almost the antithesis of the Patriot way was, in a sense, because the Patriots annually found advantages in Bill pulling out older veterans who we knew how to prepare, could handle a bigger playbook, and totally shift their identity week to week, specifically on defense, and work around that. Not to mention pick up an increasingly complex offense that just basically collapsed under its own weight by the end because there was just too much going on. This year, it's a simpler offense. You're going to have younger players, but the offensive line is really the concern for me because it's not only just the protection, as we know, of Drake May, which is really a big reason why they're probably reluctant to start him week one, maybe even until Thanksgiving. It's also what's going to determine how successful their run game is. And if you are a run-based offense and you have a hole right now, or question mark, let's call it a question mark, at left tackle and at right guard, well, those are two places, not just one, for opponents to attack or deploy their best player and their second best player across and say, we just put two mismatches across the line of scrimmage. What are you going to do about it? And we know they have good defensive lines in New York, Miami, Buffalo, the Bengals do, which they'll see right away in week one. Even Seattle could give them problems in week two. So there's just a lot of more unknowns here, which isn't to say they can't hit the over. I would just say this, and these are scars of someone who was saying over last year when the Patriots were at 7.5 and 8.5 and had the most difficult schedule in the league. I said, I don't care. They're better than what they're given credit for. The schedule matters so much. It's very, very rare that teams far outperform their over-unders when you're facing this level of difficulty with the schedule. And again, who knows how the other 31 teams are going to perform, but Vegas, more than most, does know. And so it can get worse in a way that at the end of the year gives you hope. May show some flashes. Mayo pulls off the signature win, which we really didn't have the last 3-4 years. But the record is the same or worse because, again, the over-under is 4.5. If you go to 4, you're basically meeting expectations regardless of whatever happened last year. And this is year one of a rebuild. It's how it's supposed to look.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just saying I'm basically just asking them to win like one more game. Like, for example, I look at a team like Arizona who's at 6.5, and I'm just like, I'd lean more towards the under for them. But with New England, the schedule is tough. But here's the other thing, too. The fact that their bye is not until the middle of December, week 14, I want to say, that's where things get really hard, too, because you have a lot of guys like, and you also do for the veterans in the room. And one thing that I completely blanked on until now, because you had one of the coolest experiences of the offseason by going fishing with David Andrews. Because, like, that's the thing, too, to add to the offensive line was because we know with David, he's on the back nine of his career. Great Patriot, at one of the best sound bites in team history in Kansas City, won 2 Super Bowls. But he's another part, too, to this offense where we know that this, like, if you had to guess from based off of what you've talked to him about, is it his last season or do you think he still maybe got 24 and 25?
So he signed an extension a couple of months ago. It was a 1-year extension
Yes.
because he was sending out a contract here. And to me, and in speaking with him and spending that day like I did, I think he wants to play as long as possible. But it's not lost on him the realities of the NFL, where it's not just, hey, we're only going to keep you until you're good, but we will actively try to find your replacement, which the Patriots did last year in the 2023 draft, drafting Jake Andrews as a center out of Troy in the 4th round. I'd be like, yeah, it's just a 4th round pick. Well, and talking to people within the team, he was supposed to be their starting backup center and just didn't have a good enough showing in practice to warrant that. And so David is hoping that someone is able to step up in there. And they're already rotating players who've never really played center, like Antonio Mafi got reps with the 3rd team during minicamp and OTAs. And so I would say I would bet more likely than not, I don't know what the percentage is, that he will make his last season in 2025. I think he's in some parts rejuvenated by this. But if you think about, again, the fragility of the offensive line, let's say he has – and now his age 32 season, which is really not that old, but a season-ending injury, an ACL or a bicep tear, right? Not only just the entire offensive line now go, oh my God, how can they move the ball without throwing a screen every single play? But you go, 2025 is now in question for this dude who will be 33, has been in the league for 10 years, and probably right now is about an average center in the league who gives you better value based on his smarts and his leadership. But when it comes to just one-on-one blocking, down in and down out, it's not inside like the top 12, and that's fine. But it just doesn't bode well for a player who, as you mentioned, is in the latter stages of his career.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about that just because, like, obviously, look, it tied in everything you said with the offensive line. Just like this team, I've been saying this since 2020, but I feel like this year it's really true where it's always Pandora's box with this team. You don't know what you're going to get when you open the box. You don't know. It's like, I don't know how much of a Family Guy fan you are, but it's the famous joke where it's like, the boat's a boat, but the mystery box could be anything. Like, I feel like that's like where this team can go in 2024, because when you look at even the AFC East as a whole, Buffalo, I still feel like, I don't want to say they are what Kansas City was in 2022, but I do think that in the sense of how everyone was, they were easy to write off. And all along I was saying with that Kansas City team, I'm like, do we forget who's at quarterback? Like with Buffalo, I think it's the same thing where it's Josh Allen's still going to be Josh Allen. Miami, look, they're like the hockey team that I love, not the Bruins, but the team the Bruins heartbreak every year in the sense of they have to win in the playoffs. I don't care what Miami does between September and January, win in the playoffs. And the Jets, well, for all I hope is that they crumble and fail. We don't know what's going to really happen with them. So with New England, they kind of can just sit back and, let happen what happens with them. And then just, take what you do this year and then just learn for next year to where 2025, hopefully they're that team that's in the graphics of in the hunt, wild card, not Thanksgiving, but like Christmas time, like week 15, 16, so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is a fact-finding mission of a season. And that goes for Gerard Mayo. It goes for Drake May. It goes for Alex Van Pelt. It goes for the rookies like Jalen Polk and Javon Baker we haven't even talked about. It goes for, parts of their defense, right? And so you do have certain cornerstones you're counting on. Those are the guys they re-signed. Christian Barmore here long-term. Kyle Duggar not going anywhere. Hunter Henry came back for 3 years. And so you're just trying to build from there. But there are so many unknowns. And when you just look at the roster talent, it all points to, top 5 pick, top 5 pick, top 5 pick. They're going to play the kids, which is probably going to lower your win probability by a little bit. But I would say also, the one thing I feel more sure about this team, and this is just a prediction, is that there's going to be a wider variance of outcomes here. Meaning, like, I think they'll have a big upset sometime this year. Part of that is you're just going to face a ton of really good teams. So inevitably you might just get one. But because Drake May's ceiling, even as a guy whose floor might be lower than we saw from Mac Jones, or as low as we saw from Mac Jones last year, is higher. It's just a little bit more unpredictable. And when he gets the higher end of that, throwing cross-field 40 yards off his back foot to drop in this dime touchdown, all of a sudden, like we saw with Josh Allen as a rookie in 2018, they go on the road and upset Minnesota early that season just because he's running around like a crazy man. The Patriots will get a big win. And those flashes, what they'll have to determine late in the year and at the end of the season will be how much of that was sustainable. Who are we? What's our record in the last 7, 8 games? Is that who we're going to be going into 2025? What do we need to build on? Because, again, so much is unknown. But I think because of the new faces, like I said, at quarterback, an infusion of talent at receiver, they're young. They're going to make mistakes. They'll probably lose one game 30, 41 to 3 or 6. It'll be really bad. But the upside of that will be they'll upset Buffalo in December. They might get the Bengals in the opener. Name another opponent. They'll be down by 10 points on the spread. I think that happens this year, and that's something that they're just going to have to determine. Did we get lucky, or are we really building something here?
Call me crazy, but I do think they win that week 1 game. I checked on FanDuel last night. They're plus 350 to win outright right now.
Really?
Yeah. Plus 9.5. But I just think they win that. I just see them winning that game because, well, Mitch Trubisky did it 2 years ago, but also to Cincinnati's a relatively slower starting team, and also to the Bengals face Kansas City week 2 in a very prime slot on CBS. So you feel like it could be that potential, like, oh, they're looking ahead. Week 4, I see as that game where you take it on the chin, but at the same time too, they could probably know. I just that San Francisco game, I'm more excited to see what the defense does. Can you shut down McCaffrey? Can you shut down Kittle effectively, not completely? And then I could see them winning, split with Buffalo. I could see them splitting with Miami. And even too, I look at games like but then I look at this team, like I look at a game like the Titans is a game that they can lose just because I feel like they're going to lose a couple of those games. Like in 2020, the Bronco game, the one that stands out to me the most because, that's a game effectively they should have won. And then I feel like they'll have a game like, do you remember the Arizona Cardinal game from that year?
Mm-hmm.
Just Arizona did stupid errors. Like the other team shot themselves in the foot. Everyone says like the Super Bowl 49.
It was one of the ugliest football games I've ever freaking watched in my entire life. Cam Newton had no interest in completing a pass. They got downfield before that game-winning 50-yarder from Nick Folk on a questionable late hit penalties. He's going out of bounds with like seconds left. It was horrible. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then like watch, they'll win a game like the game I still am shocked at with that entire season was the fact that the LA Charger 45-0 game where it's just like, okay, who are you? It's like the Jet game week 17 that year. It's like, okay, where was this like 2 months ago? I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot of that, but then it's that Tony Romo in the AFC Championship game where it's like, hey, New England, like, they could be back to where 2025, they play the NFC South. They're probably going to play one of the Commanders or the Giants as their NFC East matchup. So, there's a lot to look forward to, but there's also just 2024 there's going to be leaps and bounds, but at the same time too, this is a team where by 2026, you're hoping that they're contending back for playoff spots once some of these playoff teams finally start to cool off a bit.
Yeah, and to expound upon your 2020 comparison as a whole, again, I think there are significant differences. The offensive line being one, it's a younger team, just newer faces in big places. But the Chargers example is a good game to point to and say, not necessarily because the Chargers were any good. And they had the league's worst special teams going into there. You mentioned they win 45-0. The Patriots get a punt return for a touchdown. They had blocked a field goal there right before the half. There's an interception. I don't know if it went all the way back, but came close. That's an example of you're facing a team that's either equal or better than you, and you have this flux of events that just swings the game in one direction because everything just hits. It's basically your day. You play enough games, this will happen. And that's what I think is going to happen for this team. The record's not going to be pretty. The offense is going to be bad, but you'll be able to get a couple of those. And again, you just have to determine whether that was lucky or it was not. And to the point about San Francisco and Cincinnati, it is more likely they get one early. Again, we talk about variance, unpredictability. Once teams settle into who they are around mid-October, certainly getting into Halloween, that's when you'll know who's good, who's middle of the road, and who's going to be selling at the trade deadline. It would be a shock if the Patriots are doing anything else but selling at the trade deadline, given the state of the roster, new coaching staff, all these different things. But, the Niners might just not have that rhythm or that togetherness. As we saw the Patriots almost beat the Eagles and then the Dolphins last year in weeks 1 and week 2 and just couldn't finish the job.
Or even to week 3 in that prime slot where, it's like, oh, it's a Jets home opener, which I still say this week 1, if the Jets beat the Niners, you're going to see some of the craziest takes coming from like national media outlets that are obviously not up to the standard of the Boston Herald. But that's neither here nor there. I can just see like they're going to win a couple games where everyone's going to go, okay, you shouldn't have won that, but you did. Kind of like even when you say everything goes your way because of unfortunate events, like what happened in the Kyler ACL game in 2022, where look, then Colt McCoy comes in, then there's the Raekwon McMillan touchdown. There's just all this weird stuff that goes on and happens to where it's just like, oh, hey, we won, but we didn't deserve to win. What, like where the deserve or win meter is not the highest. And I don't say that in a bad way. I just say that in the way of, a general, you're going to win some games where everyone's going to scratch your head and go, how did you do that?
Yeah, it's football. That's part of the thing that you love, and then it also makes us crazy. It's an oblong ball that bounces around. You don't know where it's going to go, and that is a microcosm of the larger game itself. Again, you start with a kickoff return. You're up 7-0, and you didn't really do anything except for executed one play really well. But that's worth 7 points, and that's changes just like that.
That's what makes this game so beautiful and so crazy, and that's why I do a podcast solely on football. For as much as I love hockey, as much as I love and then I enjoy basketball and baseball, it's just this is the one sport you can talk about year round. It's just all the craziness is done. But you know what? Now is that time we're getting back into the saddle. I know you're going to be living at Gillette Stadium for the next, 4 to 5 weeks probably, and then even 4 to 5 months. But if there's anyone out there who doesn't know exactly where to find you online or what your tags are, if they want to follow you online, now's your chance to plug your stuff. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. You can find pretty much everything I do on X/Twitter at _Andrew Callahan. That's Callahan. My podcast is the Pats, PATS, Pats Interference Podcast. And then you'll hear me occasionally 98.5 The Sports Hub in Boston, doing some NBC Sports Boston stuff. And of course, writing for the Boston Herald. So everything is there at _Andrew Callahan on X, Instagram, and YouTube.
You're there first, folks. Also, too, now we know second ever person from 98.5 to be on this very show. So that's just
excellent. All right.
Alex was the other one. Great football guy to talk to.
Definitely. Love Alex.
Yeah, love Alex too. So follow all the people there, guys. Follow whether it's Alex, whether it's Andrew, whether it's Sophie. You can follow them all. They'll all be here talking football. But this has been episode 301 of YWC Football Talk, guys. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me. Enjoy training camp. And folks, the NFL train's just getting ready to leave the station. So